In this video, I want to share with you the 12 steps I go through to determine where we are in the economic cycle. In the past, I've referred to this as my economic risk score. This score basically helps me understand where we are in the economic cycle so that I can then make an informed decision about what I want to do with my investment portfolio. I don't necessarily have to be 100% accurate. I just need enough information effectively to come up with a hypothesis about the macroeconomic cycle so that I can then make an informed decision about what to do next. For those of you that are new to this channel, my name is Jared Ayers. I am a CFA charter holder and I've been investing my own money for about 20 years now with a fairly good track record of beating the market quite consistently. I've created this channel to help those who may want to have a little bit more information about how to invest if they are wanting to do it for themselves, and share with anybody who's interested the strategies, thought processes, and tactics I use to invest my own money. So I do want to get into my 12 steps, so let's go there now. Okay, as discussed, I do want to get into my 12 steps to understanding where we are in the economic cycle. This summary economic risk score tracker is the goal of this video, effectively coming up with a simple score out of 10 that allows me to understand where we are in the economic cycle. So in terms of step 1, decide which economic indicators you will use. So you will have already been familiar with the economic indicators that I like to use. I've gone into those in a fair amount of detail in my previous videos, how they track against the S&P 500 and how they behave relative to that index, whether they're leading, lagging, etc. So this is obviously my list here of my 13 indicators that I look at. So that's sort of the first thing you need to decide, or I decide when I'm doing this, is which indicators do I most frequently go to understand where we are in the economic cycle. One question you could ask is, how many indicators should I use? That is really dependent on the individual. In my experience, more isn't always better. It takes a lot of effort to get the information. It takes me probably about an hour to update 13 indicators, which isn't too much time, but when you get into, say, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, 200 indicators, which you could easily do, you really need a lot more computing power and quite a bit of programming in order to sift through and make sense of all that data. So for me, I need to know to a certain point. I've chosen these indicators because I believe they are very good at giving me a snapshot of where we are in the economic cycle. One thing, if you do want to look into sort of the impact of more information, there was a study done in about 1974, I think, by a psychologist called Paul Slovic. I think that's his name. But he basically did a study where he looked at horse handicappers and gave them effectively or tested whether more information would benefit their ability to predict the outcome of horse races. Basically letting them go through 4 separate rounds. And what was concluded from the study, again you can go look this up, was that more information did not improve accuracy, it only improved confidence. So, and the confidence score versus the accuracy score varied a lot more with more information and was a lot tighter with less information. So that's kind of the premise I use when I look at this type of thing. So anyway, once you've decided that, i.e. the number of indicators and which ones you want to use, next is determining the predictive power of each indicator. So as I've covered in previous videos, the each indicator I have here, I've decided whether it leads or lags the economy, and then I've also given it a weighting, my own choosing, of course. So I think leading indicators deserve 100% weighting, and lagging indicators deserve a 50% weighting. So leading indicators are twice as valuable in my mind as lagging indicators. So as you can see here, that's what I've done here with the predictive power weighting. So that's the next step in the 12-step process. After that, I also look at how old the most recent data point is for the indicator. So the older the data point, less timely, isn't necessarily as useful for me. So in my simple time weighting that I give each indicator, if it's in the last 30 days, it gets 100%. If it's between 30 and 60 days, it gets knocked down to 67%. If it's between 60, or if it's greater than 60 days effectively, it gets a 33% weighting. So that's what you're seeing there. But of course that's up to you how you decide how valuable indicators are. Usually lagging indicators or more complicated indicators do take more time to get, so that obviously depletes their utility when they're not as timely as other indicators. So that's just something to think about. So next, step 4, combine the predictive power weight and the timeliness weight to give a total weight to the indicator. So that's really just a multiplication of the predictive power weight and the time weight to come up with what that total weight is for the indicator. So I'm looking at predictive power plus timeliness when I'm coming up with that. And again, that just kind of gives me a good handle on how much credibility or how much weighting I should give each indicator when I'm putting together my score. So once you have that total weighting, the next thing to do is determine the direction of each indicator. So for me, that means, is the indicator increasing, is it decreasing, or is it flat? So that's literally the direction of it. No more difficult than that. It's pretty simple to see in the data, in the graphics that I produce. So it's a pretty simple conclusion to make on each indicator. After that, I look at the rate of change. So this is probably the most important part of my economic indicator analysis, is I'm looking to see, is it accelerating, is it decelerating, or is it holding steady? So, as I've said before, just because the direction is moving a certain way, is it slowing, or is it accelerating, or is it just holding steady? And that helps me understand the sort of where we might be currently in the economic cycle, and then potentially where we might be going after that. So that probably is one of the most key things I look at when I look at my economic indicators. So step 7 in my 12-step process is assigning a value to each combination of direction and rate of change. So you'll see here I have 2 tables, one for regular indicators and one for inverse indicators. An example of an inverse indicator would be unemployment. So the lower the indicator goes, the better, as opposed to, say, GDP, which should be considered a regular indicator, and the higher that GDP goes, the better. So you'll see that the combination of direction and rate of change are mirror opposites for those 2 distinctions between indicator types. For me, I use a 3-point scale in both the positive and negative directions. You can use whatever you want. For me, that just helps me give a score based on whether it's really good, whether it's kind of okay, or whether it's really neither here nor there, or kind of flat, steady state. So this is what I choose to use, and absolutely anybody can choose whatever they want or whatever they're most comfortable with. Step 8, so once you've got that, you're scoring each indicator using the predetermined values from step 7, so you've already determined which the direction and rate of change is for each indicator, and you're using your tables to effectively just populate this sheet with the resulting score from each combination. So a pretty simple step once you've done the front work. Step 9, multiply the score in each indicator from step 8 by the total weighting in step 4 for a total weighted score for each indicator. So you're looking for the direction rate of change score and the weighting of the indicator to determine the total weighted score for each one. So that then helps you see the contribution that each indicator is making for each of the total weighted scores by indicator. And of course at the bottom that gives you a number, negative 5.3 in this case, which may have some meaning, but you got to do a bit of math to figure that out. So that takes us to step 10, where you're adding up all of the weighted scores for a total economic score, 5.3 negative in this case. So you got to kind of think about what that means, which takes us to step 11. So determining where that total economic score sits in the range of possible scores from best to worst. So thinking back to my 3-point scale, for each indicator, positive 3, negative 3 kind of being the range for each one, but having a predictive power weight in there also influences it. So when you add it all up, the maximum possible best scenario is a positive 30, and the worst possible case is a minus 30. So that negative 5.3 kind of sits on the bottom half of my scale, but isn't that far off from the midpoint. So that's just, a nice to know, but doesn't really help me kind of quickly calculate what that actually means. So that takes us to step 12. Set your range of possible scores to be a scale of your choice and determine your total economic risk score. So for me, simple way of thinking about it is just 0 to 10, 10-point scale. Okay, so where are we? Are we at a 1, which would be really, really bad, or are we at a 9 plus, which would be really, really good, or where are we in between? So in my calculation, that negative 5.3 turns into a 4.1 on the 10-point scale. So from there I can then take that information and apply it to my asset allocation strategy. Plus, just at a glance, it just means something to me, as opposed to trying to figure out, okay, between negative 30 and positive 30, where does that other number sit? So, and just to give a little bit of background, my 10-point scale, 0 would be a score representing the very, very top of the economic cycle, where downside was at its maximum for the equity markets, and upside was at its minimum for the equity markets. So I would want to be thinking about not being in the equity markets. And then for sort of the upper end, so a perfect 10 would be downside being an absolute minimum, and upside being an absolute maximum. So in that instance, again for equity markets, so in that instance I would want to be invested heavily into equities to take advantage of the upside and minimizing my exposure to the other investments. So that's kind of what that means to me, and it's why I start here always before I make any kind of investment decisions or allocations across different asset classes. So I hope that gave you a little bit of an idea of how I use economic indicators to come up with a bit of a measurement for where we are in the economic cycle. If you did like the video, please hit the like button. As always, if you had any comments or have any comments or questions, please include those in the comment section. If you're not already a subscriber, please don't hesitate to hit the subscribe button if you want to see more. And of course, you can always go back to the other videos if you want to see the impacts of each indicator as I presented in the past. So, I hope you got some utility out of that video, and I hope to see you back here soon. Thanks very much.